All right, looks like we're ready to get started. If we can move over to the next slide. And just wanted to say hello to everyone and welcome to today's webinar, How to Manage a Career Change and Create Your Career Insurance Policy with Michelle Aikman. My name is Jen Blaze. I'm the Partnerships Manager here at FlexJobs. Bree Reynolds, our regular webinar host, is off today. But we're very pleased to be hosting this event. And before we dive in, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items with you guys. First up, this webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to view that recording. We'll also have a short survey in there that I'll talk about a little bit more towards the end. And second, there is a handout available for download, which you can find on your GoToWebinar control panel. It's actually in the chat area with a link that you can click to access that handout. And finally, the webinar will run about 60 minutes or so. It's a presentation followed by an audience Q&A. If you have any questions during the event, you can ask them at any time by typing them in the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. If you don't actually see your GoToWebinar control panel, look around your screen for a little orange arrow. If you click that arrow, the control panel should slide out and magically appear for you. And we'll try to answer as many questions as possible during the live event. And moving over to the next slide, we have a bit of information here about FlexJobs. So FlexJobs was founded in 2007. We just had our 9th birthday not too long ago. And we list pre-screened telecommuting, flexible schedule, full-time, part-time, and freelance jobs, basically anything that is outside of that traditional 9-to-5 office job and can help people find better work-life balance. That's what we're all about. We have over 60 people and growing on our team that all work from home. We've got some pictures over on the left of some of our crew here. I'm down there in the second row. And we're all very excited about the work that we do. We've helped over 1.5 million job seekers since we were founded. We have over 40,000 researched and vetted companies on the site. These are companies who have offered flexible jobs. So if you're interested in flexibility and looking to find companies who embrace that in their culture, we have a great database that you can check out. And lastly, we are a membership site. So we're not like other job boards where the job listings are free for job seekers and employers are charged. We're actually sort of the opposite of that in that we're a subscription site for job seekers and we don't charge employers to list the jobs. And the reason for that is there are so many scams out there when it comes to flexible and work from home jobs. And we take the time to research and screen and approve every job and company before it gets listed on our site. And this is not the case with most other job boards. So when you use FlexJobs, you get a carefully collected list of the best and most current flexible and telecommuting jobs. They're all professional level. They're guaranteed to be no scams. Everything you'll find on the site is legitimate, and it's taking a lot of the time and energy that you would spend searching for these opportunities off your plate. And we also offer a satisfaction guarantee. So if you were to try our site and were not satisfied, we would refund your remaining subscription fee. You would just need to contact our ACE client service team led by Jess, who is with me behind the scenes on the call today, and they'll take care of you. And that is FlexJobs in a nutshell. And with that, we can move over to the next slide. And it is my sincere pleasure to introduce a great friend of FlexJobs, our special guest, Michelle Aikman. Michelle is a proactive career management specialist, resume writer, and career advisor. After a past career life in engineering, Michelle changed her focus to help evolve hiring and retention practices. To help others succeed through proactive career management, she had founded Skilled Assets, a career management consulting company, and ProReactor, which was a do-it-yourself career management membership website. And she's also a nationally certified resume writer. Michelle now speaks nationwide about proactive career management, learning through adventure, STEM careers, major career changes, and much more. And she is also the 2016 AFI Air Force Spouse of the Year. Thank you so much for being here today, Michelle. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that kind introduction and for inviting me and welcoming to speak to everybody. I see that there are many people on this webinar, which is fantastic because that means we have a very diverse group here. I am sure there are people from every profession, every industry, every walk of life. So keeping that in mind, everything I'm going to talk about today is very high level and broad. So if I say something that you question, well, how does that apply to me? Enter those questions into the chat box or the question box on the toolbar throughout the conversation, and then at the end, hopefully we can have some time and we can go through and address those. So yeah, as you come upon your questions, just enter them in, and then we can continue it, the conversation at the end, addressing some of your specific interests. So before we get going with the presentation, I just wanted to kind of start on a very high level with why we're talking about this, about managing a career change. If you read the introduction to the webinar, we talked about how it's very rare to find anybody who has a linear, steady career anymore for their entire professional lives. You know, that's how it used to be, that your goal was to find an employer and stay there until retirement. And that is just not the situation anymore. People are becoming more and more mobile, and myself as a military spouse has a lot of experience with mobility and how do you deal with that, how do you make career changes. So it's becoming more common, so know that you're not alone in making career changes. People are becoming more open-minded to candidates who have varying experiences and are maybe not what they would think of in a traditional sense. So do rest assured that that is a shift that is taking place right now. So career changes happen, whether they're initiated by ourselves or they happen to us. Unexpected things happen. We can find ourselves unemployed or underemployed. We can have disruptions of all different kinds. Careers rarely go as planned, and I am the first one to say that when I first set out on my career, I'm in a very, very different place than where I thought I would be, and you can always use that to your benefit. So if you're in the midst of a major career change, you see one coming, you think you may want to change your career down the road, or you're just interested in making sure that you are resilient and you have a very smooth career path, then this is for you. And it's to cover all of those bases, people who are currently transitioning, and then people who maybe it's not even in your radar, but you want to be proactive and do what you can to make sure that you're ready when that day comes. So we're going to talk about how do you manage career change, and then how do you create what we're calling a career insurance policy. And if you think about insurance policies we get for our automobiles or our homes, and they're there to protect us in case something happens. And I want you to think about that with regard to your career. What do you have in place right now if something unexpected were to happen, to help get yourself out of that position? And so we're going to talk about that today. So by the end of the presentation, I hope that you will have gained ways to take immediate action to improve your career situation right now. And then also to learn ways to protect yourself and your family from the upheaval that you often experience when it comes to job searching while unemployed. So what we're going to talk about are simple guidelines that will help you to maintain a positive attitude and then be successful with a career change. And these are broken down into 4 simple, basic steps. These steps will also help you create that insurance policy that I talked about. So let's move forward. Just to give you a little more background, the 2 businesses up there on the left-hand side, Skilled Assets and ProReactor, I created these about 5 years ago. I wrote resumes, provided career advice, and they were all geared around helping high performers or people who do really well at whatever it is that they're doing. Helped them to navigate their career, to take it to the next step, to overcome challenge. It was an exciting 5 years, and I really enjoyed it. And it was only this year that I have transitioned full-time into Cerno. So I come to you guys, you know, having this experience, and then also having personal experience making career changes as an engineer. So this year, focusing on Cerno, Cerno is all about combining adventure and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and trying new things and working to live and work at your potential. That's what Cerno is all about. And so I am blessed with the opportunity to be the director of adventure learning, so I'm creating all the programs behind Cerno. Cerno is something that is offered through a company, so it'd be something that your company would have to select you and invite you to participate in the Cerno programming. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, at the end I'll give you a little more information so that you can get involved. So if you see the bubble coming out of my mouth, it says proactive career management. And that is really the basis for everything that I've done, and what I'm going to be talking to you about today is being proactive, not waiting until you're at a point where you feel like you're in a crisis. It's what can you do early and often. And so I want you to think about this moving forward. How can you be proactive when it comes to your career? This was the underlying message for Skilled Assets, ProReactor, and now, of course, Cerno as well. So let's talk about career changes. Why are career changes so stinking hard? There's a lot of feelings that are typically associated with changing a career or unemployment or job searching, and I'm sure several come to mind. Majority of the time they're very negative because it is hard, and especially if there's a lot of factors at play, like you were laid off, or you have gaps in paid employment, or perhaps you were fired, maybe you have unrelated experience to what you're trying to do. There's a number of things that can compound the difficulty that's associated with career change. So let's look at what some of those feelings might be and what I typically hear from people and people experience. You can feel optionless, feel out of control, feel like the process is broken, can feel this level of urgency that you just need to fix it now, you need a job yesterday, feeling undervalued, that the people who are evaluating you just don't readily recognize the tremendous skill that you're bringing to them. Can be very scary, especially with the unknown, frustrating, demoralizing, dehumanizing, especially when it comes to the online systems. You're putting your heart and soul into an application that you're putting online, and you push send and it just goes nowhere, right? Like you never hear or see anything from it again. That can be just so dehumanizing and obviously very uncomfortable. Change is extremely uncomfortable. So as a job seeker or an employee, our challenge is to adapt and do everything that's possible within our control, because a lot of the hiring process is broken. And so we need to understand what's not in our control and to keep moving forward so we can work towards our goal. It's important to manage this as much as possible so that we can avoid having all of these feelings or get out of having these feelings and to be successful with our career change. So humor me. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to introduce these 4 steps, the 4 steps to effectively manage a career change. But the reason I say humor me is because I want to walk through this in terms of soccer. Okay, I want you to visualize that you are a soccer player. You have on your cleats. Close your eyes, literally, think about it. You have on your soccer cleats, you have your shin guards, you have your long socks, you have your soccer clothes, your uniform on, you have your hair pulled back if you have long hair, you're ready. You're ready to go out on the field and play soccer. All right, so now that you have that visual in mind, I want you to walk through these steps with me. And the first one is to be proactive. So if you're proactive in terms of soccer, to me this means you need to practice early and you need to practice often, right? You have a game or you have a season coming up, you need to take the time to prepare. You can't wait until game day to learn the game or to start practicing. There's a lot of work that you have to do before the season or the game to prepare. You need to gather a team. You need to learn how to work together. You need to learn the game. You need to practice the drills associated with what you will actually use when the game day comes. You need to get all your gear ready. You need to find a coach. You need to figure out how to work well with that coach. You need to have your fans in place. Soccer games are pretty boring when there's no fans in the stand, right? Have your fans in place. There's a lot of things that go into being prepared for your season and your game. So practice early and practice often. All right, number 2, assess the situation. All right, in soccer terms, this may be, let's size it up. All right, who are you playing against? What are their strengths? What's your record? If you're partway through the season, are you on a losing streak? Are you on a winning streak? What is the situation? How much preparation have you done? Do you have a home field advantage? Do you have experience playing in this league? there's a lot of things that you need to take into consideration before you enter the season. You need to look around and assess. Okay. Number 3, creating a game plan. Okay, huddle up. Come on, let's huddle up, right? The game's going to start, the season's going to start. We got to get together and make sure we're all on the same page and we know what we're trying to do. Yes, obviously, you want to win the game, right? That's of course, but you can't just go into a soccer game with that game plan. I'm going to win the game, right? There's a lot more that comes into winning a game. So you need to huddle up. You need to develop strategies and plays for a number of different scenarios, right? Discuss how to respond and when you need to all regroup. You need to break it down by quarters, let's say, and have breaks in between to kind of reevaluate. You need to leverage your offense and your defense. You need to know your strengths and use them to your advantage. And at the same time, you need to understand your weaknesses and minimize your exposure to risk. There's a lot that has to happen in that huddle time, in that game planning time. Last one, number 4, you got to play ball. You got to play the game. Rally up your team. You got to rely on your coaches. You got to get the fans excited and engaged in you making that goal or winning that game or winning the season, whatever it is. Everything that you need to help you get that ball in that goal. It's not just you. It's your team, your coach, your fans. Everybody needs to be involved. And maybe you don't make a goal for the first few games, but if you don't keep at it, you'll never make the goal. But if you do, you'll eventually make the goal. If your situation changes, then you need to go back and revisit 2, 3, and 4, right? Number 1 is all about just being proactive, being prepared. That's going to equip you to be successful at 2, 3, and 4, and if you need to revisit 2, 3, and 4, then you can because you've been proactive, right? So now that we've gone through this, thinking about it in terms of soccer, I want to shift gears and talk about it in terms of career. So being proactive. I like to make the analogy of packing your bags for a big business trip, or I don't know, even just going to work the next day and packing your lunch, right? You can wait until 5 minutes before you walk out the door and pack your bag, or you can do it the night before. And think about how your mindset is when you're packing the night before versus 5 minutes before. And if you're like me, I tend to do 5 minutes before because I have to do it, right? There's no question. Where if I do it the night before, maybe I can procrastinate a little bit. So that's a compelling reason for me to be like, I'll just wait and do it in the morning. I'll just do the best I can. If I forget something, I forget something. But we're not talking about lunch. We're talking about your career. And so as you're considering, do I pack my lunch the night before or do I wait until 5 minutes? Remind yourself what's at stake and what you're talking about. I bring up the packing the bag analogy too to consider your mindset. You know, you're much calmer, I would guess, the night before. You're able to think clearly through all of your options. You're able to look, you know, after you've put it together and say, did I get everything? I love dessert. Did I get my dessert? Okay, good. Yeah, I got my dessert. Oh my gosh, I don't have any dessert. Maybe I should make some. You're giving yourself the opportunity to address some of the issues that you encounter. Whereas if you wait until 5 minutes before you're going out the door, now all of a sudden you don't have any more time to address those issues. So be proactive when it comes to your career. Give yourself time to think through your career plans and what you want to do and everything that we're going to talk about here in the next 20 or so minutes. And don't wait until the very last minute so you're so rushed and you don't give yourself the time to be able to learn what you need to learn, to make changes that you need to make, so on and so forth. So listed out here are some of the benefits of being proactive. So one of them is less stress, just like packing your lunch bag, right? It's less stressful to do it the night before. Could have a clear mind. This is really important if you have a clear mind when you're thinking about your life in a very big picture sense. If you are under pressure, stressed out, your mind is like tunnel vision. It's really hard to stop and really think about it in a very big picture sense. So this is really important because we're talking about What are you going to do not only next, but long term, and how are you going to feel about it, way down the road? So having a clear mind is very important. Also, time to think and learn. Like I talked about, if there's something that maybe you're uncomfortable with or you don't know how to do or it just is difficult, if you give yourself time to kind of work through that and maybe let it mull over in the back of your brain, then you're going to be better off, to figure it out. And then finally, not distracted. I see people who are not proactive and wait and are in a crunch, in a bind, and they can get distracted so easily by something that is like a little bit good as opposed to entirely good. And so being distracted can really be a problem from you keeping focus on what's really important, not only now, but down the road. So you may be more apt, if you are not proactive, you may be more apt to accept something that is very far from what you actually want and need. You also may be more apt to find yourself in the wrong job because you just chose it from options that presented themselves instead of taking the time to seek out what you really want and need. And I'm going to tell you a little bit later about the hidden job market and just how many jobs really aren't out there for you to see. They have to be sought after. You may be more apt to accept the wrong position because you get so excited about the positives that you forget to consider the negatives. And this typically happens when people are not being proactive. You may be more apt to accept the wrong position because you are so focused on just getting an employer to love you that you forget to make sure that it is right for you. So all of these reasons I have seen happen over and over again because people get themselves in this what I call crisis mode, which is they haven't done any work proactively to think about these things or to prepare for them, and now all of a sudden they're actively job seeking and they need the situation resolved immediately. And so if you are in that situation right now, then I'm going to talk to you and give you some tips as we go through this, okay? You can still improve your situation and get through it. For those of you who are not there, I applaud you for being here, one, to thinking about these things so that you can take steps so hopefully you don't get there and make these mistakes that I've just brought up. Okay, none of us want to find ourselves doing the wrong kind of work because what is no fun is accepting the wrong job to find out it's the wrong job and then having to decide, do I quit? Do I just keep doing the wrong job because I don't want to quit, and have another short-term job on my resume or whatever? That's a bad position to be in. So I want to help you prevent yourself from finding yourself in that situation. So next up, here is a super short, condensed checklist of things that you can do to be proactive. So of course this is not exhaustive, but it is some examples. So one of the things that you can do is to inventory your skills and your strengths. Maybe even just writing a list, like what are my strengths? What are my skills? What do I like to do? Inventory them. Capture them. Who are you and what are you good at? What do you like? The second one is, who am I? And I always like to think about this in terms of how companies and organizations think of themselves. When you look at a company or an organization, they always have their set of values, things they stand by that are their guide. They have what is their vision, which is looking into the future, where do they want to be? And then their mission, their reason for being, their reason for moving forward. So when I say who am I, I'm asking you, what are your values? What is your vision? What is your mission? Think about it in terms of yourself. Third, this is something that most people have thought about. What are my goals? What are my short-term goals? What are my long-term goals? But I want you to think about all of these things that I'm talking about in context of only you, and that's it. Not what opportunities are available to you, not what are you currently doing for your job or what you think you want to do next. Take all of that out of the equation and just focus on you as a person. What is it that you want to do with your life? Okay? Don't let yourself get get sidetracked with, oh, well, I can't do this for this reason or whatever. Just really take a moment to look inward and think about yourself. The last one is building your network. This one might be even the most important one because when I say building a network, we're talking about building relationships. It takes time to not only meet people, but to build trust, to build familiarity, to build a connection that's genuine and works both ways, right? They're not one-sided exchanges or transactions here. We're talking about relationships. It takes time to build those. Remember we were talking about the fans and the coach and the team? Those are all relationships that have to be developed, and it takes time to do that. LinkedIn, I'm sure you've all, if you haven't, we need to have a conversation. LinkedIn is so powerful and important when it comes to a professional network. And if you don't know what those are, please put it in the text box and say, I need more help with LinkedIn, so that everyone at FlexJobs knows they need a LinkedIn webinar, because LinkedIn is so powerful. You should all be on LinkedIn, and you should be using it to not only create new connections, but to enhance your relationships. It's also great for researching and understanding what's out there, which we're going to talk about in a minute here. But in addition to taking time to build relationships, LinkedIn is also one of those platforms that has a little bit of a learning curve. And I know I was also one who said, well, I don't really understand the purpose of LinkedIn. It doesn't seem like it has any value. And it took time for me to see the value. And LinkedIn, the developers behind LinkedIn are pretty smart in that they build in benefits and features and functionalities in tune with how many connections you have and how much you use it. So the more you use it, the more benefit that you get from it. And again, I'll leave that for a LinkedIn webinar on another day, but the benefits are endless. And so if you're proactive, then you're not only giving yourself time to establish those connections, but also giving yourself time to learn the system and learn how to use it effectively. If you are currently job seeking actively and you are not currently on LinkedIn, I don't think you will have very much success to jump on, create a profile, and get any significant value out of it other than being able to find jobs that are only posted on LinkedIn and applying to them. As far as leveraging your network and doing the research that you want to do, you're going to be very limited in what you can do. So get on it now, start learning, start asking questions, figuring out why should I be on LinkedIn, how should I be using it, why should I be using it, and get started now. Okay, so you can have that benefit and that value down the road. Number 2, assessing the situation. If you recall this, for soccer, it was looking around and figuring out, who is the other team, what am I going up against, what is my track record, just really taking a look at, okay, where am I right now? Take the time to look around and learn. Who are your competitors? Who is on your team? Who are your fans? What is your level of urgency? Are you happy with what you're doing? Are you doing what you want? What's happening in the market right now? Are people even hiring? How are they hiring? All those questions. Those are all things that you should be doing in this assess the situation period. Okay? The am I on course? A lot of those questions follow right under that. Taking a look at what you did initially under the proactive section, and then looking at it in comparison to your life and your situation right now. Are you on course to what you want to achieve long term? And then the second and third boxes I think are really important, and people often forget that. To think about what is in your control and what is out of your control. And there are many things associated with a career change that are out of your control or are unknowns that you don't know how decisions are made or how a process is going to go forward for that particular company or whatever it is. If you can really stop and think about what is out of your control, then maybe you can find a little more peace with some of those negative feelings that we were just, that I brought up earlier. Because sometimes those feelings stem from thinking that the situation is completely in your control. So really stop and think about what is in your control, what is out of your control. And for the things that are out of your control, how can you prepare for them? How can you either overcome them and make them in your control, or how are you going to prepare mentally for if they don't go the way that you want them to? What are you going to do? All right, number 3, game planning. Huddle up time. So I see this in two pieces. So the first piece is creating a career plan. And this can be a very time-consuming activity because this is, okay, you've looked, you've been proactive, and you've done your self-assessments. You've really thought about who you are, what your drivers are, what's important to you, where you want to go. You've assessed your situation. Okay, this is what I'm dealing with. These are my challenges. These are my obstacles. These are the people I'm competing with. This is the market. You've done that evaluation. Now it's, okay, this is what I'm going to do about it. This is how I'm going to move forward. And the first thing that I encourage people to do is create an ideal path. All right, if everything happened as I wanted it to be, this is what I would want to happen. I would want, this step, and then ultimately be here when I, let's say, retire. And I always like to ask people to think about, what is your vision for your day of retirement? What do you want between now and then? And define and line out, what is that path? But we all know that careers rarely go as planned, right? Things happen, and there's some things that will happen that you can't prepare for or you don't know, unexpected situations. But what you can do is do your best to think about those situations. And so I'm actually jumping forward to the assess your risk side. So thinking about where are your risks, with actually following through with your ideal plan. What are things that could happen? And after you evaluate those, then maybe you come up with a plan A, B, and C. Okay, I'm going to do A, and if this happens, well then guess what? I'm going to go to B, or whatever. And maybe you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, however much effort and time you want to put into kind of planning for your various scenarios. As a military spouse, I have to plan on lots of scenarios. I mean, crazy. And sometimes people say, why even plan? It doesn't matter, because I have no idea what's coming. I am a firm believer in have a plan and then revisit the plan if you need to. But it's better to operate with a plan than without one. Number 4 is the worst case scenario. I want you to think about what is something that would just throw your world upside down. And this is hard to think about. So one of the things as a military spouse that I have to do is I have to have a will in place for my spouse and myself. It's a requirement, being in the service, because fatality is a reality that we have to consider and plan for. Most people who are not in the services don't think about that when they're in their 20s and 30s, about having a will in place. But it's important because that is something that could happen. So I'm not suggesting necessarily that you need to go as far as, planning for if a death were to occur. But I want you to think in those terms. What if you were to get laid off? What if your industry were to collapse, like the construction industry, or right now oil and gas is having a real hard time? There's several industries that all of a sudden everyone who was working there felt that their job was either very vulnerable to going away or did go away, and now they had to find a new career. I want you to think about some of those worst case scenarios. What if you couldn't work any longer? What are you going to do? Okay, very important stuff. And that's part of this career insurance policy, is making sure you've thought about these things and that you are taking actions to set yourself up for handling those if they were to occur. Okay. Last one, gap identification and creating an action plan. So remember the proactive part? If you identify a gap that you have with something that you want to do, if you're proactive, you have time to deal with it. Maybe you need to go get a certification. Maybe you need to give yourself some time to do some free work in an area that you don't have like zero experience in, so that when you go apply, you at least have some experience, even if it's unpaid, some experience to give an employer some confidence and assurance that that you're a good investment and that you have done this kind of work. Whatever it is, if you can identify your gaps early and take action, then you're going to be more likely to be successful. Remember that when we were talking about understanding your weaknesses and minimizing your risk? That's what I'm talking about right here. All of us have challenges that make it difficult for an employer to be 100% about us. Okay, one of mine is I have 3.5 years of unpaid work experience. I have volunteer experience that maybe an employer might look at and say, well, that's not applicable or relevant, perhaps. Some employers are like, yes, I totally get it. Sometimes they don't, right? I also have very diverse work experiences that may not readily be apparent how it applies to what I'm trying to do. So for me, my action plan has always been taking the time to put the language together to connect the dots for them so that I can communicate very clearly how it applies. So those are all the things that I'm talking about when I say identify your gaps with what you're trying to do and create an action plan to overcome them. Leverage your strengths, minimize your risks. All right, so not only do you have to create a career plan, but you also have to create a job search plan. And before we move on to the job search plan, I want to mention that if you wait until you are actively transitioning, then you are likely to omit doing this career plan because that's what people do. They skip this part. And think about how much you're missing if you don't do this part of it. If you don't do the career plan, you just go right to the job search plan. Okay? So even if you are actively transitioning and feel that burn and you're like, I need this solved today, you got to decide, are you going to take the time to spend some time creating your career plan, or are you going to go ahead and just do what you can to make a transition, and once you're in a better place, then revisit your career plan? Regardless, I want you to commit to one or the other, because by omitting and neglecting to like really think about a career plan and put it together, you're just putting one foot in front of the other, and you could end up anywhere. And it might be very, very far from where you eventually would like to end up. Okay. So here we go, job search plan. So here are a few action items for your job search. Targeting is absolutely so important. That could be a whole nother webinar as well. So again, if you don't know what that is, make sure and type it into the box. Let them know. I need to understand more about targeting. Very, very important. The approach part is how are you going to approach looking for a job? How are you going to approach finding opportunities? How are you going to approach when you do find an opportunity? Are you going to apply online? Are you going to network and find internal champions and referrals? Are you going to leverage your your network, your social networks? What are you going to do? What's your approach? And I had mentioned earlier about the hidden job market, and I just want to remind you of that there is a great deal of jobs that are never posted, and or they've already picked out who they're going to hire before they even post them. And I'm sure many of you have encountered that already, where you go, interview or you call and they're like, oh, well, we already have a candidate in mind or whatever. You need to be that candidate. You need to be on their mind before they ever post the job. And so that's an approach I want you to consider, and I'm going to present a few facts here in a minute that will hopefully persuade you to make sure that you're doing more than just applying online. And the last one is time. How are you going to spend your time? I'm going to give you a little simple handy tool. It's part of the handout that's available to download here on the box, and I'm going to show it to you as well. How are you going to spend your time? Making sure that you're thinking about it and then tracking it. So before we go to that tool, let me give you a few numbers. 90% of employers look at candidates online. And the reason they do this is because they want to validate that what you're telling them is what you're telling the world. What they find online can help you. They can make hiring decisions based on things that, positive things that they see about you. Can also be extremely hurtful, and I'm sure many of you are familiar. Don't have drinking pictures, don't whatever, right? Anything that can tarnish your reputation. needs to go. But it's also, are you clumsy with your grammar or your spelling? Are you, they're looking for certain things that give them insight into who is this person really? So be aware of what you have online. And then also I talked about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great way to package and communicate yourself in a professional sense to an employer. So consider LinkedIn. Okay, but just keep in mind, 90% of employers are looking at candidates online. What do you have online? Are you spending adequate time developing your reputation and maintaining it online in a way that will help you when it comes to changing careers? If you have a side job and that's the only job that appears online, when an employer is looking for you, especially if you're looking to change careers, if they get confused by what they see, they may not be apt to to go with you. So keep that in mind too. Are you consistent in your branding and your messaging, especially if you're changing gears and shifting directions? You want to project yourself in that way that's consistent with what you want them to do. Next up, 2% versus 20%. If you are qualified and you apply to a job solely online, there was a study that was conducted that showed that you have 2% chance of being hired. Now, if you have an internal referral in addition to applying online, you now have a 20% chance of being hired. So if that isn't enough of a compelling argument to seek out internal champions and referrals, someone else in the company who says, you know what, we should look at this person, or we should hire this person, I like this person, I trust this person. It's very important, okay? It can definitely increase your odds. All right, so here's that time management tool that I talked about. It's a very, very simple circle. And here I blocked it out as an example. So let's say that you are going to commit to spending 10 hours a week making your career change, conducting a job search. So I have here 50% of the time spent on networking and relationship building. So this is seeking out referrals, requesting informational interviews, talking to people, having conversations, meeting people, building relationships. Okay, a quarter of it is spent applying online because you have to have your application in to be considered. The other quarter is broken up between conducting research, making sure that you really understand where the opportunities are, why you want that opportunity, what is that opportunity all about, what is that company about, what's going on in the industry, who are the key players, etc., 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 right? All of the time just fact-finding and getting information so that you can make a decision and it can assist you with making sure that you're competent and ready to have conversations with people. And then the last block is, let's say, career fairs. If you're in an area where there's a lot of career fairs, maybe you need to spend some time there having conversations face-to-face. I don't know. You decide what's on your pie graph. This is just one example. I mean, you could break it up in a number of different ways. I just wanted to give you an example to consider. But I also want you to consider making sure that your applying online section is significantly smaller than probably what it was before you came into this presentation. I meet a lot of who say, but I've applied to 100 jobs or 200 jobs online. Not an effective way to conduct a job search. So make sure that you are diversifying what you're doing, taking into account the things that are not in your control, and making sure and optimizing the things that are in your control. Make a commitment to this and track it. Make sure that you're actually spending your hours doing these things. Okay? All right. Last one, let's play ball. You need to execute your activity plan, right? You need to go out, you need to start doing everything that was on that pie graph. You need to track your time. You need to prepare stellar marketing, self-marketing materials, and by this I mean, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, all of those things, because now you have your game plan in place, you're going to do it. Now I want to bring up the point that as a professional resume writer, I can't tell you how many people would come to me and say their resume was the first step that they were taking to making a career change or doing their job search. If you have been paying attention, we have talked about a zillion things that need to happen before you write your resume. Okay, so I hope that this helps you see how much work goes into it before that step. Once you have all of this other information figured out, writing those documents becomes a heck of a lot easier because you know how to frame them, you know what your strengths are, you know what your weaknesses are, you can use the language that's appropriate for whatever your target is. It just makes it all a lot easier. I mentioned targeting earlier. Again, don't apply to 100 jobs. Maybe apply to 10 and spend just the same amount of time that you would have applied to 100 for those 10. Making sure that you're targeting, you've done sufficient research, you're demonstrating, that you know that this opportunity fits you and that you can bring value to them. And then last, leveraging your network, leveraging your coaches, your teammates, your fans, everything. So I want to wrap up all of everything that we've just talked about into a little package, right? This is your career that we're talking about. This is your life. On the day of your retirement, I don't know about you, but I want to be happy with the way that I've spent my time working. Now, today, this week, this month, this year, this is your chance to take control of your career. To be uncomfortable, to put yourself out there. If you aren't happy, then try something new, right? You have control of changing your situation. And if you're feeling some of those negative feelings that we talked about earlier, then just even taking a few of these actions will help you feel better about it, will help you gain some control, and will help you reframe your perspective. Okay? And maybe you need to take some steps just to get in a better place where you can stop and think about things, get out of what I call crisis mode, and get back to a place where you can kind of collect, and then you can do it right the next time, right? You can do this stuff proactively. So, my favorite quote is, life is 10% what happens to you, but 90% of how you respond to it. And I don't know who to give credit to because when I search for it, it comes up with two different people, Lou Holtz and Charles Swindoll. So I'm just going to credit both of them. But think about that, right? There's so many things that happen to us. How are you going to respond to it? How are you going to react to it? So moving forward, you have that simple career planner available to you now. I want you to use it. And even if you're not currently in a career change, print it off and put it away and get it out someday. It is super simple. It is basic, and it's to make it easy. Obviously, it doesn't encompass, even a little bit of what we've talked about here today, but it's at least a little to get you started. Okay, I want to answer your questions here. We have about 10 minutes, so that's good. We have some time. And then on the left-hand side above my image there is a hashtag that's available. So if we don't get to your question here on the webinar, then feel free to tweet your questions, and I'll jump on Twitter for about an hour after this presentation and answer as many as I can. Okay, so just make sure and include that hashtag, and I'll see it and it'll show up. Also, I would love if you would connect with me. So I have my website and my Twitter handle, and you can connect with me on Facebook and LinkedIn. And then also Cerno, there's our website, and then our Twitter handle, for some reason it's not showing up. It's GoCerno, @GoCerno, and then obviously on Facebook. On the handout, there are also connection links on the bottom, and they have hyperlinked. So if you touch them, like if you touch the LinkedIn button, it'll take you to my LinkedIn page, and you can connect with me. And then if you are interested in becoming a Cerno climber, it is an invitation-only event through employers, but if you are interested, please connect with me, contact me, reach out to me, either my website or LinkedIn or something, so I can talk to you about a special program that we have called our Strive program, and it's an application that we competitively select applicants to be invited to attend our program. So I'd love to talk with you about that. Also, if you want Cerno at your company, let me know, because we are reaching out to companies right now and talking to them and figuring out how we can bring our programs to their company. So let me know that as well. So with that, I just want to thank you guys for having me. It's always a joy to talk to so many people at once. Throw your questions out there. I'd be happy to address them.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle. I really loved, it really resonated, the message of just being proactive, approaching your career change before you find yourself saying, I just need anything, and then it's only that short-term fix. I really like that. So thank you so much for all this information.
Welcome.
And as we dive into the question and answer session, just a reminder, if you have a question for Michelle that we can tackle during the webinar today, you can type it into the questions area on your GoToWebinar control panel. We do have some good questions already, and we'll get to as many as we have time for within the hour, so let's dive right in. The first question is about targeting. A lot of people mentioned in the comments, I'd like to know more about this. Can you dive into that briefly?
Yes. So the essence to targeting is to make sure that you are using language that makes sense to the employer and that you are positioning yourself as an ideal candidate for that employer. This is really important if you have to translate experiences. So an example that most people can relate to is military members use certain military jargon when they're in the service. When they get out and go apply in the corporate world, many times people do not understand different rank structures, different group structures, platoons and troops and, ARWC 2, 3, whatever, right? It's, there's so much there that's lost in translation if they don't convert it for the employer. And so you need to think about, what do you have on your documentation and the way that you talk that may not make sense, that may not translate easily, that you need to take the time and convert for them. Also, remember how I talked about the example of connecting the dots? So if I have an unpaid work experience and I need to connect the dots to the employer to help them see how that's relevant and applicable, well then I need to use language to convert that. So maybe, I'm trying to think of an example right now. So I was just featured on a podcast called the Make It Snappy Show, which is fantastic if you're interested in productivity. It was just released this last week, and it was talking about, I did a Six Sigma project on meal planning. And I applied for an engineering job that dealt with some Six Sigma elements. And so I used that as my example. Even though it wasn't an engineering application, it was a meal planning application. I was able to talk about it in terms of engineering language that made sense to them, so they were able to see, oh my gosh, it's the same thing. You were just applying the principles to a different application. So that's just one example of how can you take language and convert it into language that they're used to seeing. So for example, I think there's one of the articles that I've written for FlexJobs, which there should be a hyperlink at the bottom of the webinar info page when you first registered. It was talking about translating skills, and there was an example, I believe, of a teacher going to an account manager, or maybe the other way around, I can't recall now. But anyways, it's talking about rephrasing the wording and the language so that it makes sense to an employer. Also, employers are looking for that perfect candidate. It's a very competitive market out there. So if someone comes across their desk that doesn't, kind of quite fill their needs of what they think they want to see, then you're going to have a hard time. So you need to put it through a filter and a lens of what is that employer going to think when they look at your documentation. And that's the reason that you need a target. That's why when you apply to 100 jobs, you're going to be pretty ineffective because you aren't going to look perfect to those 100 employers. So engage people, ask questions, get feedback from a variety of different sources. You have to filter it because everyone has different opinions and suggestions about the way to do it. But start asking people, what do you think when you see this? Do you think that, how can I phrase this better? And start molding it and taking time to target your package so it looks the best that it can to that particular employer, to that particular position.
Awesome. And if you go to flexjobs.com/blog and search for Michelle Aikman, you can see articles that she has written for us, transferable skills info, lots more good stuff. So you can definitely check out some of the info that Michelle has been talking about here as well. And our next question is talking about how you evaluate your chances entering into a competitive field. So say you're going to attempt a career change and feel like you have the skills and experience, but are you going to be able to break in because there's going to be so many more people trying to get positions than there are positions available? How do you evaluate your chances when trying to enter a field to see how competitive it is?
This is where I think informational interviews can come in extremely handy. If you aren't familiar with what an informational interview is, look it up. Okay, type it in the chat box and say, FlexJobs, I need informational interview help. Informational interviews are great in the sense of you're initiating them. They don't have to be formal. Maybe it's coffee. Maybe it's just you're meeting someone who has insight into what it takes to get in there. Maybe they have insight into the hiring process, or maybe they would be your future colleague. Maybe they work for a comparable company but is not directly involved with what you're trying to do. I don't know. There's a variety of different people that you can engage with and just say, hey, I'm really interested in finding out more. I'm really interested in doing this. I want to make sure that I'm setting myself up, to be successful, getting in here. I recognize, it's very competitive. What can I do, to maximize my chances? And ask that third person for some advice, someone who has some insight. So that's probably, in my opinion, the best thing that you can do to really gauge what is the situation. The closer they are to that company or that position or that hiring process, the better the information, but you have to tread very carefully because at the same time, you don't want to cross any boundaries with, let's say, asking the hiring person to give you insight into the process, because that may be a violation of their policy or what they would consider as appropriate with engaging with a candidate. So make sure that you're paying attention to those things. But an informational interview absolutely is great. There's a lot of information online put out through the federal government as far as industries and trends and things. They're always lagging because it takes time to collect that information, but if you're looking at big trends, like let's say 5 or 10-year trends of, what is the pay rate or what is the unemployment rate or something, that's a good place to look. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has a lot of data there. States often have data. Regional employment labor boards or groups typically have information. So look, if you're looking at a specific regional area, reach out to those people and ask them as well. But I think number one is informational interviews, having conversations, building relationships with people who have that insight and can provide you with some guidance.
Great info there, a lot of great resources. And sort of switching from interpersonal face-to-face communications, we have a question. What are your thoughts on how much time people should spend managing their social media footprint? How would you prioritize those efforts as part of your pie graph?
Wow. Yeah, that one's a hard one because it varies. If you are a person whose job deals with anything regarding social media or marketing or communications or let's say visual, anything to do with anything visual, it's really important that you're online and that people can gauge what are you doing. Let me see examples. Let me see how you're conducting yourself. What is your brand online? What is your footprint? So for those, I think it's very, very important that you're on there. Depending on your profession and your level, and I mean there's just so many variations that come into it as far as how much time you should spend doing it. I don't have a solid answer that would work across the board. It's really individual to you. I guess I just encourage you to put yourself sitting on the other side of the table. And if you are hiring someone and that you're interviewing them and they're telling you great things and you're like, oh, this person sounds really great, I'm going to go search them online. Like I have kids. Guess what I do for every babysitter that I consider? I look for them online, right? And what am I looking for? I'm looking for things, it'd be awesome if I see them, winning awards, or, oh my gosh, they wrote this fantastic article that just blew me out of the water, that just took up my impression of them, like up 10 notches, or, oh my gosh, all they have is like fun going to the beach stuff. I don't know, Put yourself on the other side of the table and think about what does that employer care about, what's important to them, what kind of concerns are they going to have that they're going to want to go online and validate, and use that as a guide for how much time you should be putting into what you're doing online. If you want to be found, if you want like a recruiter to find you or an employer to find you, then that's a whole other thing, that needs to be discussed, because then you have to be present and you have to maximize your SEO, and that's a whole other thing, a ball of wax that you have to consider if you want to make sure and position yourself for passive activities, which means you are approached.
All right, we have time for one last question, and it actually ties into your last statement there about letting yourself be found. We have someone asking about the value in creating a personal website, and they sort of specifically talk about how deeply should you delve into, your personality, at a certain point, your values, your beliefs even, what value is there in that, and how deep should you go?
I believe in simple is best, because if you become overwhelming, then you're overwhelming, right? If it's too much to digest, and then you're opening yourself to a lot more by exposing yourself more. People making judgment about you or whatever ahead of time. So keep it simple, keep it concise. People have very short attention spans now, and so you want to make it bite-sized. I think that there's value in a personal website, and the same value that there is with LinkedIn profile is that you're controlling how you're presenting yourself. It depends on how you're going to use it or how you're going to communicate. Let's say you put it on the footer of your email so that when you are corresponding with people via email, you have a hyperlink there. It's really easy for them to click and see more info. I do that with my LinkedIn profile. That would be a very valuable, thing to do, because then you're controlling what information is out there. Just make sure that it's complementing to what they're seeing on your resume or what they're hearing from you. As far as the values, vision, mission, you could put it out there. For me, I think it's better just for you to have an understanding what it is, and then to guide all of your communications around that so you're consistent with your brand messaging.
Fantastic. And that is going to do it for today. We are out of time. Thank you to everyone for attending our webinar today. On behalf of all of us at FlexJobs, I hope you found the event helpful. And remember to look out for our follow-up email tomorrow. You will be able to watch a recording of this event and download the event handout from that email. And also in that email, there is a very quick, less than 1 minute survey that we'd love for you to fill out. That survey helps us continue to improve our webinar offerings for you. So please fill out that survey. We really do appreciate it. And finally, a big thanks to Michelle Aikman for presenting today and for providing such valuable information. As we mentioned, to continue this conversation with Michelle, you can head on over to Twitter for an extended Q&A for the next hour or so. You can see the hashtag, we had it up on the screen there, it was FJWebinar. So tweet your question using that hashtag FJWebinar if you want more information about managing your career path. Again, thank you for coming to this FlexJobs webinar, and we wish you all the best in your job search and career development. Have a great day.